just there, I guess. I don't know whose stuff that is, but just close the door for me, please. And we're learning about Shabbat. We started yesterday, a little bit the day before yesterday. When the Torah introduces Shabbat, we find a fascinating phenomenon. Where's the first time that Shabbat is introduced as a mitzvah? Who can tell me? Har Sinai. Good. Revelation at Sinai. One of the 10 Commandments, as they're called. Number 4. And what does it say there? And everybody, how does the paragraph start? So there's 2 answers that are correct. Because this is one of the famous differences between the first record of the 10 Commandments of the Revelation at Sinai. It says, Zachor, et Yom HaShabbat Lekadsho. Remember the Sabbath day to make it holy. And in the book of Dvarim, when Moshe repeats the history of the Jews, tells them that they stood at Sinai and that they heard God say the 10 Commandments, he says, not Zachor, but Shamor. Famously, people know about this because of the Chadodi. Shamor v'Zachor v'dibur echad. We sing it every Friday night. Shamor v'Zachor v'dibur echad. So what do Chazal say? Well, which was it? Which did he say? So the Chazal, our sages say, b'dibur echad. He said both. Both Zachor and Shamor. Thank you. Thank you so much. Zachor and Shamor. And that's something that only God can do, and we can't even imagine what that means. Our ears can only hear. If 2 people are talking at the same time, I don't hear either one of them, usually. So I tell them, wait, hold your hand, hold your hand up. It's okay, it's fine. And sometimes, but this was miraculous. And it's very important. We're going to talk more about the oral Torah and the written Torah and how to understand it. But I think it's very clear that we this is a great example. Which came first, the written Torah or the oral Torah? This is a pet peeve of mine. The written, everybody says the written Torah, of course, we got the written Torah. And then later on, the rabbis came and gave explanations. Not true. Doesn't seem to make sense. Take, for example, the 10 Commandments. Okay, we went to Sinai, we heard, whatever that means. I don't know if we heard with our ears or with our hearts or with our souls, but we heard, or all of the above. But we heard the voice of God. And only later on, where did they get written down, these 10 Commandments? Well, twice. It gets written down on the tablets. Hashem tells Moshe, go up to Har Sinai, I'll give you 2 tablets of stone. And he engraved upon the stone with special engraving, the 10 Commandments. And then they got broken, the first set. And then we got a second set on Yom Kippur, finally. So, which came first, the oral or the written? Oral. The oral, right? And it's not perhaps foreign to you. The most common verse in the Torah is Vayidaber Hashem El Moshe Lemor. God spoke to Moshe saying, that gets written down in the Torah. But it gets written down after God told it to Moshe. So first comes the oral, and then it gets written down. And what we see here is the classic example again, is the 10 Commandments. God spoke it to the Jewish people. Here it's not to Moshe first, it's to the entire people. Some of it perhaps was only to Moshe, and then he gave it over to the Jews. Some of it was a direct revelation. And then it gets written down. And what's fascinating, it gets written down twice. Once in the book of Shemot and once in the book of Dvarim. And there's even differences between them. Well, why should there be any differences? I think we have to understand that revelation is not easily translatable to the spoken word, and it's not easily translatable to the written word. We're going through filter after filter after filter from something which is a revelation, which is beyond beyond even our reason and our understanding. It's coming from the infinite. So coming from Hashem, it makes sense that there's going to be some differences, some nuances, which can only be maybe understood with two different versions. And Moshe, God told him, write down this version in the book of Shemot and write down the other version in the book of Dvarim. And so we have, which one's right? Zachor or Shamor? Both. They're both right. They're both part of God's word to the Jewish people. And so this teaches us a little bit about how, direct revelation, prophecy, we don't have that for a couple thousand years now, since the prophetic period. So we don't know what we're talking about really, but it is a central feature of Judaism that God comes to man and speaks to him and to the Jewish people and spoke to them at Sinai. And he, again, that gets recorded in a few versions. The Chazon Ish talks about this as well. And he says, why do we find other discrepancies between the book of Dvarim, for example, and the mitzvot earlier in the Torah? He's referring more specifically to the mitzvot. But he says, there's even contradictions within the Torah. I have a book from 400 years ago from Rabbi Menachem in Israel. I think it's called The Conciliator. He wrote a book. It was, I think, originally in Spanish. It was written, and he is translated into English. Beautiful. And he goes through the entire Torah, the entire Chumash, contradiction after contradiction after every parsha, every chapter. He says, this is a contradiction, this is a contradiction. He raises the question. And then he gives an answer. And he's an amazing scholar. He gives an answer from the medieval philosophers, from the Christian scholars. He says what their answer says, what Rashi says. He says what he thinks. There's many attempts at making reconciliation between the contradictions of the Torah. But the Chazon Ish explains, this is not a bug, but a feature. This is something that is inherent in taking God's word and translating it into a directive for people. And why did God leave in those contradictions? For us to tease out the meaning, for us, the sages who came later, for them to perhaps reconstruct and devise a programmatic plan for the Jewish people, what we call today halacha, based on Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. The oral Torah is the rabbis analyzing and teasing, mining the text with all the contradictions, mining it to pull out those pearls of how we should live our Judaism and relate to God in our lives. And what are the laws? He's referring specifically to laws. We find the same thing, differences between different portions in the Torah, in narrative sections as well. Which was it? Did the spies come and ask to send, did the Jewish people ask to send spies? Or did God tell Moshe, go and send spies to check out the land of Israel? It's a contradiction. Even the most famous contradiction was just last week in the Parsha Bereshit. Parsha Bereshit, there's not one and not two, but three different creation stories. I don't know if you noticed it. Did you read your Shnai Mikra Vecha Targum? Read the Torah twice on your own and with the translation. So there's three different creation stories with differences between them, contradictions. So you can just say, ignore that, or you could look at it and try to see what could it teach us. What are the different variations on the theme? What are the new insights we can gain from these different versions of the same story? All ordained by God to tell us, to reveal to us in the Torah. We're all supposed to study the Torah and analyze it and see the differences. We're supposed to close our eyes to the differences and try to understand what they mean. What could they teach us? So by now we're talking about Shabbat, Zachor and Shamor. It's not just, oh, there's a word, well, maybe God said or something that says both. What does that mean? It's meaningless. What's the meaning of Zachor? And what's the meaning of Shamor? And both are true. God wants us both to remember, Zachor, et Shabbat, and to Shamor, which is safeguard, to protect. What does that mean to protect the Shabbat?
Keep it.
To keep it. What does that mean to keep it? Keep it from what? Keep it. What does it mean to keep the Shabbat? To remember, I remember. Don't forget. What was
Negligence.
Negligence, you're saying?
Make a fence.
Make a fence. You protect the Shabbat with a fence. How do you do that? It's time. Can you make a fence in time?
Like Shemor Shabbat, you have to restrict yourself from doing melacha.
Melacha. You have to guard the laws of Shabbat, which tell you what not to do on Shabbat. So don't violate that fence, that metaphorical fence of the forbidden activities on Shabbat. And Zachor, so we have Shamor. You're good. You guys are all saying good things. So guard the Shabbat means to guard it from violation. Don't violate it. And so what could Zachor mean? Remember. What did we forget? Of course we shouldn't forget. We said Hillel every day and Shammai, right? They went shopping. They remembered the Shabbat the whole week long. But even more so on Shabbat. How do you remember? It's Shabbat. Of course I remember. What does it mean? There's another meaning of the word Zachor. It's not only, we say it in modern Hebrew too. There's Lizkor and then there's Lehazkir. Lehazkir, the Hifil form, the causative, is to mention, to say, not just like to talk about it. So Lizkor is to remember. In Hebrew, there's like these families of meaning. It's called the Shoresh. It's called the Shoresh, right? In the verbs, so there's Zayin, Chaf, Reish. That's but if you use it in different binyanim, different conjugations, different constructs, they're called, then they have a slightly different meaning. It's a shade of meaning which is different. So to remember something you do in your mind or in your heart, but lehazkir is something you do. You mention things with your mouth. You speak. So, but they're you can see to mention something. Well, when you speak about it, you remember it. So it's a related meaning. So that's what we do with the binyanim. Binyanim, they're like a family of meanings. Anyway, so let's see it inside. Here he has a good translation in page 11. Page 11, section 8. We're learning Shabbat. The laws of Shabbat, chapter 1, section 8. All right, Yosef, start us off.
Zachor and Shamor.
Okay, so.
Two mitzvot constitute the basic elements of Shabbat. Zachor, commemorate, and Shamor, observe.
So you hear those translations? Commemorate. It says the word memory in there. Well, what does to commemorate mean? It's something you do because you're remembering the Shabbat. So, and how does he translate Shamor? You all said guard, or he says observe. That's to keep to the laws. So he's going to expand upon these that there's a negative and a positive here. Shamor is more don't violate it, observe what you're supposed to observe, and commemorate is a positive commandment. Let's see. Go ahead. Keep reading, Yosef.
Shamor is a negative commandment to refrain from all labor. For 6 days, one must take care of his needs and productively engage in the world. But on Shabbat, we are enjoined to desist from all labor. By doing so, we clear space in our soul, which we are commanded to fulfill with the positive mitzvah of Zachor, whose content consists of commemorating the holiness of Shabbat and using it to connect with the fundamentals of faith. These two mitzvot are so intimately linked in that they are united at their root. They split into two complementary mitzvot only upon entering the human realm. This is the meaning of the sages' dictum Zachor and Shamor were stated simultaneously, something that the human mouth cannot articulate and the human ear cannot hear. This is Shev.
Shavuot. It's one of the sections of the Talmud.
We see this in the Torah itself. The Decalogue, as a report in Shemot 20, introduces Shabbat with the word Zachor, whereas when the Ten Commandments are repeated in the Devarim, it is replaced with Shamor. Zachor is a positive commandment rooted in love and the divine attribute of Chesed. In contrast, Zamor is a negative commandment rooted in the divine attribute of Din, judgment, which sets boundaries so that man may turn away from wickedness. Positive mitzvot are at the higher level as they enable the people to come closer to Hashem. However, the punishment for transgressing a negative mitzvah is more severe because it causes more serious damage, both to the sinner and to the world at large. Zakor is closely linked to the creation of the world, and the first Shabbat, as the Torah states. Commemorate Zakor, the day of Shabbat, to sanctify it for the 6 days Hashem made heaven and earth and the sea, and all that is in them. And he rested on the 7th day. Therefore Hashem blessed the 7th day and hallowed it. The mitzvah of Shachor is more closely linked to the exodus from Egypt. Observe Shamor, the Shabbat day, to sanctify it, for you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Hashem freed you from there with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore Hashem has commanded you to keep the day of Shabbat. I love this spiritual principle. Shabbat was embedded in the world as its very creation. However, it was only after Israel survived the iron furnace of the Egyptian enslavement that they could understand how terrible it is to be subjugated to the material and how necessary it is to stop working in order to observe the spiritual concept of Shabbat. The two commandments of Kor and Shamor are hinted in the two words Shabbat. Its simple meaning is related to Shevita, cessation of work, associated with Shamor. However, its deeper meaning is related to Shuvah, repentance or return. For on Shabbat we return to the foundations of faith associated with Zachor.
Sweet, sweet. I like particularly what he said, that you need the Shamor to refrain from the work, to make space in yourself, in your mind, so you could fill your mind with the Zachor, with the positive meanings associated with Shabbat. So they work together, the positive and the negative commandments. A lot of people keep Shabbat partially. People are on a journey, people find it too hard. Which part of Shabbat do you think is easier to keep? The Zachor part, positive commandments, or the Shamor part, the prohibitions? That's harder, you said? Yeah. What's an example of a shamor, of a prohibition?
No electricity.
You don't turn it on and off, the electricity. Yeah. What else? The phone. Yeah. What else?
I don't know, preparing for cooking.
Cooking, sure. Yeah, good. Yeah. Give me an example of the Zachor. Things that we do to commemorate the Shabbat positively. Sudot, have meals. Yeah, what else? Good morning. We're going to do it? Okay. מעולה, אז תודיע לכולם, בעזרת השם. אז נודיע לכולם אולי קצת כיבוד, בעזרת השם.
For time with Rabbi Yisrael Cohen this afternoon, you said you want the time, right?
Yeah, after
6:20 to 7 is 6:20 to 7 is good. Okay. Are you going to be here at the length of the day, sir? Okay, so I'm going to get you also time number 1 student. You also, you're studying today with Rabbi Halevi, are you not?
We'll see. I talked to him a little bit about it yesterday.
Okay, Shalom.
Shakach. So what's another example of Zachor, of things we do, positive commandments, to commemorate the Shabbat? Kiddush, absolutely.
Tefillot.
Yeah, tefillot, good. So I think a lot of people like the Shabbat and they make Kiddush. But then they maybe turn on the TV. Right, the Zachor, maybe they have a meal too. They have a Shabbat meal. They buy some challah. It's hard in Israel to even get regular bread on Fridays. Everybody's buying challah. So they do some of the Zachor, and some of the Shamor too. Some people they don't drive on Shabbat. A lot of people don't drive on Shabbat. But maybe they don't go to all the tefillot. Maybe they don't go to the synagogue. So there's a range of observance. Of course, we're striving to fulfill all the mitzvot of Hashem once we realize and appreciate that it's a package deal. That's what Shabbat means. It's beautiful. He says Shabbat includes both concepts. Shabbat clearly has the meaning to rest, but also teshuvah. If you use the same letters as teshuvah, shav, and then the taf. So if you put the taf on the other side, it goes together with the noun teshuvah, which of course is return to Hashem, and that is with positive work. It's not just only to stop doing sins. It's also or to not get involved in work, like we're going to talk about Shabbat. Anyway, Zachor v'Shamor, these are the two basic categories of mitzvot regarding Shabbat: positive commandments and negative commandments. Positive commandments, primarily the ones which are from the Torah, are kiddush. Zachor, like as I was saying, it's to commemorate. It's actually to say, to mention that today is Shabbat. Usually we use a cup of wine, but that's rabbinic. If you don't use a cup of wine, you just say to somebody, Shabbat Shalom. On Shabbat, you fulfill the biblical command to mention Shabbat, to commemorate it. If you just change your clothing, you do something to commemorate the Shabbat, you're fulfilling the biblical level. Of course, on the rabbinic level, you have to use a cup of wine, and there's rules. Some people put together the other bookend. Havdalah. Some people say this Kiddush and Havdalah are both part of the biblical command of Zachor. And in this volume, there's 2 volumes on Hilchot Shabbat. In this volume, we're going to learn about Kiddush and Havdalah first. And then we get into the laws and we're going to learn about the prayers. So pretty much this book follows the pattern that first we do the mitzvot of Zachor, and then we get into the Shamor. Shamor, though, has a lot more rules. Not cook, not 9 categories of work that get defined that are forbidden on Shabbat. Okay?
Question.
Yeah, shoot.
We went to Ariel last before the Sukkot and went to yeshiva. In there, we spent Shabbat in the yeshiva. We've seen monitor screen turn on in Shabbat and it has time on it, and that's allowed, right?
Well, I think if you go to a community, you can assume that the community has a rabbi, and in any practice that they're doing, probably the rabbi gave it his okay. So sometimes we think we're smarter than everybody else, but if it's a well-established, Orthodox community, you can assume that there's something. It must be okay if they're doing it. Now it's good to ask questions. It's good that you asked the question. Right here, actually, the shul next door has got these screens. A long time, but I assume that they still remain on. Yeah. Also the lights. Do we not use lights on Shabbat? So the rule is, as long as we keep them on beforehand, we're not turning them on and off. It's okay. Same thing with the computer screen. If you have it on. Now, there is a rabbinic prohibition that you're not supposed to violate the atmosphere of Shabbat. So even if you're not actively turning on the TV, to leave a TV on in your house, it's going to ruin your atmosphere of Shabbat. And it's a little more complicated here in Israel, actually. It's actually easier to leave the TV on, halachically, in Chutz La'aretz than it is in Israel. Why?
It's easier to leave the TV on.
Halachically, it's easier. It's less of a problem to leave the TV on when you're outside the line of vision than when you're in the line of vision. Why? Because this is a Jewish country and the majority of people working here are Jews, and so who's running the TV station? It's Jews. So Jews are causing this broadcast to happen. And so you're enjoying a Jew violating Shabbat, which is more problematic than Chutz La'aretz. You can assume it's some non-Jew. They're not violating anything. They don't have to keep the Shabbat. So if you want to watch the NFL game in Chutz La'aretz or whatever it is, then that's less of a problem halachically than here in Israel. If you watch TV in Israel, you're aiding and abetting violation of Shabbat by the TV people and the electronics people, etc. But in any case, it's against the spirit of Shabbat. Once in my lifetime, I remember, maybe twice, that I grew up in a religious home. We kept Shabbat, but my dad decided to leave on the TV, not in the central room, in a basement room somewhere. Hey, shalom, Pinchas. In a basement somewhere where nobody could hear it. And one of the times was when man landed on the moon. This was such an excitement, and if I remember correctly, it was on Shabbat. And I don't know what year it was, if anybody can. 69, I was 2 years old. Look at that. 2 years old. I don't know, that's one of my earliest memories, I guess. And second time was, I think, during one of the wars. And my dad was wars in Israel, and my dad was very connected. And he couldn't hold himself back. He needed to be updated to know what's going on. And but these are like childhood memories. But usually we don't leave the TV on. It ruins the Shabbat atmosphere. Of course, this last week I carried my phone because I needed to have the alerts. And my wife needed to call me. We have my mother-in-law living with us who's diabetic, and there was some issues with her sugar. And so for security reasons, by all means, if you have no better solution, then you use the electronics to save a life, no question about it. But other than that, we try to avoid any kind of electronics. So a screen that's left on, it's a little bit odd to have a screen on in shul, but it's a special screen. They're not showing the internet over there, right? It's like telling you what time mincha is and what time shema is and all those kind of things. So these announcements. So in recent years, they've become more technologically advanced, and instead of having paper or cardboard or even metal signs with engravings, like there's all sorts of fascinating systems where you have like a little card that you could switch. Oh, today we say Yalav Yavo. So you take that card and you put it on into the sign on the wall, and everybody gets reminding. Today we say Yalav Yavo. Some shuls have every Shabbat the name of the parsha. Yeah. We have it up here, exactly. So this is the old-fashioned way. So some people update it to computer screens. And then the Gabbai, it's easier for the Gabbai. You just program it once. You don't have to every week physically change the little notice. But it is a little jarring to see a computer screen on Shabbat. I agree with you that it's a TV. What TV? It doesn't go together with the atmosphere of Shabbat. So I think some places they actually turn it off for Shabbat. Although it sort of defeats the whole purpose. The purpose is to communicate it. This is, and that's when a lot of people come to shul more on Shabbat than on other days. So if you want to give over the information, but halachically, as long as you don't play with it on Shabbat, you just have it on from before Shabbat, just like we use the electricity that we turned on earlier. You can leave the screen on, and if it's not going to make noise, that also takes it out of the atmosphere of Shabbat. Like a TV, like I was saying before, for the news or something like that, that could be, playing music or something like that. We don't do that on Shabbat. But if it's a silent screen giving you information, on Shabbat, I can see that a rabbi would permit it. Personally, I never had that challenge. I was not asked by my community when I was the community rabbi. But I would lean towards allowing it, although, I could see that other communities, they would want to turn it off for Shabbat. But the bottom line is, you went to an Orthodox community and you saw that the screen was on.
Yeah.
You can assume that the rabbi was involved and he allowed them to do it. They're not doing something against the halacha.
I was just thinking, because if this is the case, then maybe, let's say if there is no time inside the house, the phone can turn on as a purpose of just looking at the time.
Right. This is a common question. People many times use their phones as their watch, as their timekeeper, and also for an alarm clock. You want to wake up for shul on Shabbat. So can you do that?
But you cannot touch it.
Right. You shouldn't be turning it on or off. So actually, my son or someone recently just told me they have a special app, a Shabbat alarm clock, on their phone. It goes on and off automatically. It goes on and goes on for 20 seconds and then turns off. And It's no different than any other alarm clock, except that you don't have to turn it on. You don't have to push the button. We don't want you to be pushing the buttons on Shabbat to turn it on. So, a couple months ago, my wife's, I think it was her phone. She had left an alarm on, and it kept going and going and going, hours and hours and hours, and it was driving us nuts. It was loud, and so the truth is there are halachic solutions, not absolute solutions. The first thing best thing, simple, is don't touch the phone, just cover it up. Put some pillows and blankets on top, and then you won't hear it. So we tried that, but it was still loud. So the next thing we did is move it. Now, muktzah, usually you're not supposed to move anything that you're not allowed to play with. You're not allowed to, if you have a pen, you're not allowed to write on Shabbat. So you're not allowed to move a pen either. So really, we don't carry around phones because you're not forbidden to activate them. But in the case where it's for the sake of your enjoyment of Shabbat, and you move the muktzah in a indirect manner, there's lots, we're going to learn some of the laws of Shabbat. So that's what I did. I took it and I moved it to a far off room, and I covered it with pillows and blankets so we didn't hear it anymore. And then but I could still hear it a little bit. And then after a few hours, or the next morning, I noticed, hey, it stopped. And after Shabbat, we went and we saw that the battery ran out. That's it. So this does happen on Shabbat, but best get yourself a little clock, or there's actually special clocks. For example, this clock, I believe that it can even. No, it doesn't. There is a clock like this. I bought it once for my kids, or they got it as a gift or something. And basically, it has this cover, as you can see, and it covers up over the buttons for Shabbat, or it slides over. There's different systems, and that way you can set the alarm and then cover up the buttons. And it's designed for Shabbat. It also turns off automatically without you pushing any buttons, and that's better for use on Shabbat than a regular alarm clock, which you might be tempted to, take your hammer and smash the thing. Let me sleep, throw it against the wall. But yeah, presetting the timing is allowed. Technically, as long as it doesn't disturb your Shabbat atmosphere, All right, so far so good? Onwards. Number 9, Zachor, the foundations of faith. So, with the commandment to commemorate the day of Shabbat, to sanctify it, we are enjoined to recall the foundations of faith. It's not just about, say, Shabbat Shalom, and you fulfilled the mitzvah. Because you mentioned it's Shabbat, and today's Shabbat. So you said the word Shabbat, you fulfilled the mitzvah. That's true on a basic level. But what's the deeper meaning? What's the point? Why does God want us to declare today is Shabbat? Rabbi Lamed explains, because Shabbat reminds us of the foundations of our faith. Page 13. Pinchas, so nice to see you. Maybe you'll read for us from the top of page 13.
15.
13. 1, 3. This is why the mitzvah.
This is why the mitzvah of Shabbat is the first of the 10 commandments. First, we are commanded to believe in God and know Him, as it states, "I'm the Lord, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage." Following this, we are commanded not to worship foreign gods. You should have no other gods beside me. You should not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness. You should not bow down to them or serve them. The third commandment is to honor his name and not to swear The fourth commandment is about Shabbat, the day that is praised from the foundation of our faith in the world. So Zohar states that all the principles and the secrets of faith are linked to Shabbat.
Okay, so he goes through the first 4 commandments, and they're all pretty fundamental elements of faith. Number 1 is, there is a God, I'm your God. Number 2 is, no other gods. Number 3 is, respect your God. Don't say his name in vain. Right? Honor him, respect the name of God. And number 4, right after those basic elements of faith, comes the Shabbat. Stands to reason that Shabbat is a continuing on the same theme. That somehow Shabbat also reminds us or is a way that we express our fundamental beliefs about God and the world. Okay, so what are these fundamental beliefs about God and the world? I just saw another book written by a colleague here. The title of the book was Rav Kook's Interpretations about God and Man. It's pretty basic. The fundamentals of our relationship, of faith in the world, is our role, God's role, how they work together. So let's see what Shabbat teaches us about that. Okay, Yisrael, you ready to read for us the next paragraph? We recall, yes.
We recall to fundamentals of faith of Shabbat. The first is the creation of the world. Shabbat attests that the Creator made the world in 6 days of rest on the seventh evening, and he continues to give the world life and
sustain it, yes.
In the second fundamental in that God took his people out of Egypt. By the doing so, he made clear to all that in additional to having created the world, he also supervised and managed it, punishing the weak and rewarding the righteous. He chose Israel to be his people, through which he provided providence. It made manifest in the world. And they tell us that the mythos of the Sahon and tells in one case and Sabbath throughout the week by preparing for it. Similarly, the Levites in the temple would prepare the singer of the dairy farms with the formula. Today is the first, second, as day of the before Shabbat.
Yafa, thank you. Stop there for a second. So what are the 2 major fundamentals of faith he says about Shabbat? One is God created the world, and he gives it life, and the second is he created the Jewish people. He created the Jewish people, and he chose Israel to be his people. So it's pretty basic fundamentals. We spoke about them yesterday, how Shabbat is intrinsically connected to the Jewish people, and the mitzvah of being the partner of Shabbat was given to the Jews, and we have that privilege of bringing God's word into the world through keeping of Shabbat. So the mitzvah of Zachor, it's not just to say Kiddush. In the Kiddush, we mention that God created the world, and we mention that God took us out of Egypt, and so we dwell on these themes on Shabbat. this next paragraph, he speaks about what we said yesterday, that you can fulfill the mitzvah of Zachor not only on Shabbat, but the whole days, all the 6 days of the week. Whenever we say today is not Monday or Tuesday, but Yom Sheni or Shlishi or Revi'i, what are we counting to? We're counting up to the Shabbat or from the Shabbat, as we spoke about yesterday. Okay? Sorry you missed it, Stephen, but you'll catch up. You can read the, not Stephen, as it said. Shmuel, sorry. Hopefully Stephen's listening to us. He's at home with the kids, as far as I understand. But they're opening up some school for a couple of hours, as far as I understand. The latest, we'll see what happens today. Zrat Hashem.
Sorry.
Yeah, I hope things get back more to normal, and I hope we're successful in the war, more importantly.
Should start in there.
It's started any moment now, really. Biden's coming in an hour, approximately, or in half an hour. He should be landing, and he'll be here for a couple of hours. I imagine soon afterwards the offensive will start, but who knows? Nobody knows. I don't surely know. What I want to do, what I will like to announce is that at 11 a.m. today, instead of the regular Parsha Shir, we're going to have a gathering of the entire English department and assemble together to mark the beginning of the semester and to give each other some strength. So special events ahead, about an hour from now, okay? Yeah, sort of last minute in terms of the announcement going out, but Bezrat Hashem should be good. Okay, let's skip to the bottom of page 13. The primary way in which we fulfill the mitzvah of Zachor is through Kiddush, as I was telling you before, in which we invoke the central themes of Shabbat in brief. And the sages instituted that the Kiddush be recited over a cup of wine and shortly before a meal, so that the Shabbat will be mentioned at the time of joy and pleasure. And we're going to see some of the laws that you have to recite the Kiddush at a meal. You can't just say, take a cup of wine and then leave. Take a cup of wine and then have a meal. So we're going to see the details of that. Next page, page 14 at the top, it says, although we fulfill the basic obligations of Zachor through Kiddush, so you could say, oh, I did Zachor, I did Kiddush, that's it, I'm finished. The mitzvah in principle is to sanctify the entire day. Torah states commemorate the day of Shabbat to sanctify, implying that the entire day should be set aside for holy matters. Torah study and attending lectures by Torah scholars, everything that we do to fill the day of Shabbat with holy activities is a fulfillment of Zachor et Yom HaShabbat LeKadsho. Now, the next section now, page 14, the section 10, he's going to introduce the concept of Shamor. Shamor, we're going to talk about, as I said, the majority of the book, the majority of the rest of the classes, when we talk about the prohibited activities, they have to do with, safeguarding the Shabbat from violation. And he's going to introduce a little bit the concept of melacha. Melacha, what's forbidden on Shabbat is doing what we call work in English. Where does that have to do? What does that teach us? What is that? What's the meaning of these prohibitions of work on Shabbat? Let's read it. Section 10 on page 14. Shmuel, take it away.
Okay, Shmuel, cessation from crafting Mishkan. During the 6 weekdays, one must take care of his needs and productively engage in the world. Most of his abilities and energies are directed towards working in his fields, providing food, shelter, and clothing, and other productive activities. As much as one may enjoy his work, it contains an aspect of enslavement. Ongoing necessities ensnare one in the chains of this world, causing him to forget about faith and the soul. Desisting from all work on Shabbat allows us to rise above the mundane pressures of the here and now, and reach for the world of freedom and rest, a world where the soul can express itself. This is the meaning of the sage's dictum that Shabbat is like the world to come.
Can I just stop you for a second? You know how we feel it nowadays? Because we don't go out to the field too often during the week. What makes you feel free on Shabbat?
No driving,
free from your phone. I think is the most important part of Shabbat nowadays. People really get addicted and get drawn in, and it affects your whole day. But you're free from your phone, then you can let your soul soar. Go ahead.
In order to fully appreciate the virtues of Shabbat, on Shabbat, a Jew must look at the positive in the world. As it is written, a song for the day of Shabbat. It is good to praise the Lord, to sing hymns in your name, O Most High, to proclaim your kindness at daybreak, your faithfulness each night. Daily. On Shabbat, one must focus on divine providence, which directs everything towards the good. One must also lovingly accept reality as it is, without feeling any pressure or desire to change it. Even if we are missing something that we did not have time to prepare before Shabbat, or even if something upsetting happened, we should accept this with equanimity and enjoy being with God. By doing so, blessing and sanctity will spread to everything that we do during the weekdays.
Go ahead.
One might have thought that only secular activities would be prohibited on Shabbat, but actually the Torah prohibits any type of activity necessary for the construction of the Mishkan, the tabernacle erected by the Israelites in the desert. Moreover, the 39 malachot, types of labor forbidden on Shabbat, are derived from work done for the Mishkan. And all forms of labor that were involved in assembling the Mishkan are prohibited on Shabbat. Thus, juxtaposed to the descriptions of the work done in the Mishkan, we read, "Nevertheless, you must keep my Shabbatot," and Shemot, which teaches us that although erecting the Mishkan is a great mitzvah, one must desist even from it on Shabbat. For even crafting the Mishkan needs to be connected to its inner divine essence. If this were not the case, all the difficulties in putting up the Mishkan would likely cause us to forget its ultimate purpose. And the Mishkan will be left like a body without a soul, unable to fulfill its purpose of revealing the Word of God to the world. Sometimes it is specifically those whose work is linked to the holy who need to be particularly careful about this, because due to their awareness of the value of the holy, they are likely to invest their all in building a framework for it, to the point that they forget its inner essence.
So let's say you're building a shul. It's a big mitzvah, right? You want a shul. Can you continue working on Shabbat? Right, that's exactly what the Torah introduces to us. As it tells us to build the Mishkan, it says don't work on Shabbat. Build the Mishkan the rest 6 days of the week, but on Shabbat, even though you're doing a mitzvah. God told you to build a tabernacle. Don't do it on Shabbat. So we can never forget the Shabbat. You don't want the involvement in the vessels to cloud the light which is supposed to fill the vessels. So same thing with the rest of the world. Go ahead, Shmuel. Even though
There is a big difference in status between Mishkan and the rest of the world, in reality the whole world is meant to be a Mishkan. That is, a place where Shekhinah, the divine presence, can dwell. Consequently, all of man's labor must be connected to the crafting of the Mishkan. Of course, in the Mishkan, divine idea is expressed in an obvious and concentrated manner, while in the rest of the world this happens in hidden and manifold ways. Therefore, one must orient all his actions towards the greater glory of God, in the field or in the factory, while engaged in scientific research or in business, all in order to improve the world and perfect it, until it reaches its ultimate purpose of becoming Mishkan for the Shekhinah. The money one makes must also be dedicated to living a godly life, using it to establish a family that will serve as a Mishkan for developing positive character traits and inculcating godly ideas. This can all be accomplished by using the power of the holiness of Shabbat when we abstain from such labor, and from which all labor draws its inner meaning.
So it's interesting, tonight I'm doing a wedding, Bezrat Hashem. Yeah. If you'd like to come and dance, it's not far from here at the Ramada Hotel, 10 p.m. Come with your dancing shoes on, and hopefully you'll make sure that there's a mechitza there. You won't dance mixed with the girls. But in any case, there's this idea that when you get married, you're creating a mishkan. Your family is like a place for the divine presence. Mishkan comes from the word Shekhinah. Shin, Chaf, Nun are in the word Mishkan. Like Mikdash is a place for Kodesh. And Midbar is a place for guidance, the bar, etc. Miklat, you know what a miklat is? The shelters, which we hopefully will never see again for a long time, is what's Misrad HaKlita in Israel? Absorption. So miklat is a place for absorption, where it absorbs you, absorbs somebody in need, somebody who needs protection. So it's a shelter. So Mishkan is a place for the Shekhinah. Your home is supposed to be a Mishkan. Everything you do, you're doing it for the sake of God. You're developing the land of Israel. You're working to find the cure for cancer in your laboratory. Whatever you do is holy activity. So you would think, well, I should do it 24/7. If it's so great, if I was with everything, working in business and I'm providing for my family, isn't that a mitzvah to provide for? Yes. There's all these mitzvot. We're bringing godliness into the world. So you should do them 24/7, all 7 days of the week. We learn from this precedent, even the Mishkan itself, not the metaphorical Mishkan of your family, or the mitzvah of bringing godliness into the world through finding a cure for cancer. Forget about those metaphors, the original. Even the Mishkan, we were not allowed to work on Shabbat. To keep us on track, to keep us focused on the ultimate meaning, which is for which we're working towards, for which we're developing the world and developing our families and developing our abode of holiness. We need to keep that one day a week which we stop working to make sure that we don't forget the ultimate purpose of bringing godliness into the world, even though no less are you bringing godliness into the world when you're doing it the 6 days of the week. There's 2 modes to bring godliness into the world. One is to actively work and develop the world and develop both, in all spheres of education and industry and science and business. This is not like we don't have God during the week, but there's a different mode of relating to godliness in the world on Shabbat. Shabbat, we have to cease from labor, and in that way make sure that we all of our work the rest of the week stays on track. It's focused, just like when you're a butcher, right? You're cutting meat day and night, and every once in a while the butcher stops. What does he do? He has to sharpen his knives, right? Now, of course, the metaphor in my mind is an army. You shoot. Every once in a while, you have to calibrate the sights to make sure that you're shooting in the right direction and that you're as sharp as you can be. Same too with our lives of bringing holiness into the world and connecting and bringing the divine presence, the Mishkan. It's what we do the whole week long. All of our lives, we're trying to bring godliness into the world. But we need once a week to stop actively doing that work, putting it into practice so that we can recalibrate and recognize the ultimate purpose of all of our work. Okay? Continue, Shmuel. Bottom, page 15, please.
It is also important to be aware that man's purpose in life is not to work hard. If Adam had not sinned, we would still be living in the Garden of Eden, working there joyfully and achieving satisfaction without worries or stress. Since the sin, though, we earn a livelihood only by the sweat of our brow. This exertion helps us to correct the sin, but it is also liable to root us in the material world, far from the ideal goals of faith, freedom, joy.
So we do have to work hard, but that's not in an ideal world. Now it's ideal for us because we've got to get back to the Garden of Eden. We're not in the Garden of Eden. So we have to work hard. This is our job, but we're liable to forget the ultimate purpose. This is why Shabbat, go ahead.
And this is why Shabbat, which connects us to higher ideals, is so important. Shabbat thus provides a deeper meaning to the 6 weekdays, so that they are not merely focused on immediate survival, but rather on perfecting the world and moving it closer to redemption, when once again it will be a Garden of Eden and Mishkan for the Shekhinah.
Yefeh. There are exceptions in the footnote. He says there are exceptions. There are sometimes we do violate the Shabbat. We do work on Shabbat. Anybody know what they are? Pikuach nefesh, for sure, to save a life. We overrides all of the Torah. But specifically overriding Shabbat is the temple service. In the temple, they offer sacrifices. They slaughter them. We don't do that usually. And also Brit Milah. The 8th day falls out on Shabbat. We do a Brit Milah. It overrides the Shabbat. He says in the footnote, these mitzvot specifically express the inner singular connection between God and Israel.
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur we have on Shabbat. Yeah, we fast. We don't eat the meals on Yom Kippur that falls out on Shabbat. Yes, it also overrides because these mitzvot. He says the explanation is they're consistent with the idea and do not constitute its desecration. But this is the tradition. Okay, Shabbat makes me almost want to be in Shabbat already. All this talking about Shabbat is like making me hungry for Shabbat. It's only Wednesday. Well, Wednesday, are we closer to Shabbat? And what did we say yesterday? There's that third perspective. One perspective is Shabbat is at the end of the week. Another perspective is Shabbat is at the beginning of the week. The other perspective is Shabbat is in the middle of the week. So Wednesday is the beginning of the week. Wednesday, we're counting up towards Shabbat. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, prepare. And then Sunday, Monday, Tuesday is feeling the aftermath, coming down out of Shabbat. I have a son who likes to extend Shabbat for hours and hours, many times into Sunday. He's really extending the Shabbat. There's other rabbis who do it into Monday and Tuesday. As I said, you can say Havdalah until Tuesday if you don't do it on Motzei Shabbat. Some version of it. But Wednesday, by all accounts, we're now preparing for the upcoming Shabbat. We saw yesterday the Hillel and Shammai were preparing for Shabbat from Sunday. But by Wednesday, for sure, everybody realizes that these are the days that are closer to the Shabbat that's coming than they are to the Shabbat that was. So now we're really getting ready for Shabbat. Okay, yeah, question.
I forgot.
Okay.
Is Sabbath you bury?
We don't bury bodies on
No,
Shabbat.
no.
We do it after Shabbat. Yeah. It's a problem when there's a long extended Shabbat, like Rosh Hashanah is 2 days. In the day before they had refrigeration, it could be really bad for the bodies to be out in the sun, and it's not pretty. And so there is a tradition that if there's bad conditions, you're allowed the non-Jews to bury the Jewish bodies for you on the 2nd day of Yom Tov. But I'm not sure Rosh Hashanah is included. But in Chutz La'aretz, when there's a 2nd day, which is rabbinic. But the truth is, I just spoke yesterday, I think yesterday, with a neighbor of mine who's a big tzaddik. He's a gardener, but he's a volunteer in the Chevra Kadisha. And usually the Chevra Kadisha, that's the burial society. They help prepare the bodies for burial. You wash them, tahara it's called. You wash them and you dress them in these shrouds. and then you dig the grave and you put the body in the grave, and it's a lot of work to do. It's not very pleasant. That's why I call him a tzaddik. Wow. He's involved in this. So I was walking out of shul with him. I said, at least in our area, it's been quiet. We haven't had burials in the cemetery of Tekoa, even though there's been a war now for 10 days, 12 days. So he says to me, it's true, but my team, our Chevra Kadisha, our burial society, has been volunteering to help the national center, where the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bodies have been taken from the horrible massacre 12 days ago to be identified first. It's a very thorough, very long process of making sure that the bodies we know which ones they are. And then, once the family's been told and we know who's who, then they go to tahara, to the purification, the cleaning process of washing the bodies and dressing them for the funerals, and then the families have the funerals. So he's been doing shifts, even though it's far away from Tekoa. So he said, now that is a whole different ballgame. You know, when you do a burial in your local neighborhood, in your local community, the body comes from the hospital right after the death, or wherever, if they died at home, whatever it is, you bury very quickly within the day. So the body still looks pretty intact. But now we're talking about this is still going on. He says when they were volunteering the other day, 30 bodies in one day. It's different. It's a different volunteering. It's a very different experience to have to see 30 bodies one after the other in one day. Can you imagine 30 times 30 days in order to get to 900? And so of course there's others, in parallel, but 30 a day, and the bodies are coming now. We're 12 days later. We're not the day after they died. The body decomposes. And not to even mention, don't want to even think about the horrible and gruesome mutilation of the bodies which these monsters were involved in. So he's seen a lot of horrible things in one day, in one volunteering, one shift. So it's really gruesome. And the big mitzvah, the biggest mitzvah, these people, we really owe them so much that they're doing it on our behalf. The community has to take care of the dead. And so this is on a national scale, very different situation. And so it's more than one day, or 2 days, or 3 days, or 2 weeks after they were killed, still not buried because the sheer numbers and the process of identification and so forth. So, yeah, this is, you mentioned, do we bury on Shabbat? That we don't. But the truth is, also I'm on a rabbi's list, and the head of burial in the entire country, pretty much, he was looking for a source. He couldn't find the source. In Israel, the custom is to bury in the ground directly with no coffin. You bring the body on a stretcher towards the
shroud.
Yeah, the shroud. Yes, sure. Shrouds, yes, but you don't put the body in a coffin. The body is on the stretcher. It's covered with a talit, and then when you put the body into the ground, it rests directly on the earth, because this is the earth of the Holy Land. It says in the end of the Torah, we read just before the break. V'chiper, at the end of Hazino, the special song of the Jewish people, V'chiper admato amo, that God will bring atonement for his people and for his nation. And the ultimate end of history is where, even though we sinned, even though there was a long and storied relationship between the Jewish people and Hashem, between the nations and Hashem, the end of it, the The last three words are V'chiper admato amo, that God will bring atonement for his land and for his nation. And the way our tradition reads it is that somehow the land itself is part of this atonement process. And so the Jewish people are buried as close to the land as possible with no coffin. And there's a few exceptions to the rule. It's very shocking if you've never seen it before. I've lived in Israel for 30 years, so I've seen many funerals, and I'm already not shocked to see the outline of the body lying on the stretcher, covered off with the talit. You don't actually see the body, but you get close enough. Okay, I was a rabbi. I helped on a tahara once just to learn what's going on, and but yeah, you see the body lying there, and the body is placed down carefully onto the bottom of the grave, which is earth. And there are some exceptions, though. In Chutz La'aretz, of course, you use a coffin, like around the world. There's some exceptions. One exception is soldiers. There's a rule they made for all soldiers, that they bury them in a coffin. For, in the case when, in war, many times body parts are missing or whatever. Don't want to get too gruesome. But so that they made it standardized, that all soldiers is about, I think they mentioned yesterday, out of the 1,300, 300 of them are soldiers. But what about the rest? So this rabbi, the chief rabbi of burial in the entire country, was looking for this source that he was misquoted or something, and somebody gave it to him, that said that there are instances, for example, they decided recently that they're going to do temporary burial. Some families want to bury only in their community, in their town. Their town has a cemetery, but now their town is in a war zone. So they can't bury them right next to their father or their mother or their grandmother. It's a family that people want that the burial should be together, where they lived. There's all sorts of, and that's by law. You're entitled to be buried in the town where you lived, but now we can't access them. So they decided to do temporary burial.
With a coffin.
And this is I think what he was looking for the sources for. That we're going to use a coffin for these temporary burials, so that when, I don't know, a few months from now, maybe a year from now, I don't know, when they reinter the corpses, we won't have to get involved with what they look like and and maybe the decomposition. So I believe that they're going in that direction. That those who are doing a temporary burial, they're going to use a coffin, even in the land of Israel, which goes against the tradition. But unique situations call for unique. Yeah, crazy, very, very difficult work. Sorry?
It's like, you really, because you're there with the bodies. I mean, it's like you're there. It's like you're there in the, in the atrocity. I mean, it's like
right. You can't deny it. You face it. You have to face it. Yeah. Even regular death. Binyamin for many years was in the Chevra Kadisha. Even just regular death is hard enough. It's hard enough to deal with corpses, but in this situation, and then the sheer numbers as well as the gruesome activities, it's just. Who's in Zaka?
There's I think one of the chief rabbi, an Orthodox guy, who was on TV the other day, and he was just telling his story about how the number.
Yeah.
And just crazy things like the Hamas, they've done terrible things to people's homes, and they gone into a room and they did what they did, and then they closed the door and they put grenades in the top of the door, so when people came in, Zaka or the soldiers, they would also get blown up.
Right. That's why it took so long, and still taking so long to clean up this mess, because we have to be careful that nobody gets hurt going into, to recover what we can. And you have to have the bomb squad basically come first, or the soldiers, to make sure that, the civilians can come afterwards and take care of the bodies. Ay. It's they're a difficult situation, but B'ezrat Hashem, we're getting close to the end of that portion of the war. Of course, for the hostages, that's a whole nother story. That's ongoing. Hopefully, I'm praying that Biden's visit, as we're speaking, will push ahead some kind of relief for the hostages. He is the president of the United States, maybe the strongest man in the world, maybe. So maybe he can do something to help these poor families. But one way or the other, B'ezrat Hashem should give us strength and give those families strength. And of course, B'ezrat Hashem will win the war. No question in my mind. But it could take a while. We might have to switch our leadership before we actually win the war. But that's already politics, and I don't want to get involved in that right now. Okay? Anybody else? Amikam, you wanted to say something? No?
No, I was saying Biden was threatening us not to take over retake over Gaza.
I don't know what he was doing and what he is doing. I'm not there.
I'm just a puppet for his party.
I don't know. Like I said, I don't want to get into the politics of it.
Maybe you celebrate one Palestinian war, then terrorists put a dog rule it
Yeah.
for coming into hospital and put a bomb.
Oh, terrible.
Because it took a baby to
Right.
come in the hospital.
Terrible. Wow.
And then
Apparently, again, I don't want to get too gruesome, but apparently they left the. Yeah, it's okay. Apparently they left these bombs and grenades not only on the doors, inside the bodies. They actually put grenades inside the bodies. Yeah,
in that case, it was not.
Crazy.
It was a plastic one.
Plastic doll?
Yeah.
This is
Okay, we should hopefully be motivated to destroy the evil from human society, and that's the best thing we can do for human society. Everybody's talking about you have to be humane. The most humane thing we can do for society is to rid it of such evil. B'ezrat Hashem. Okay, let's go back to Shabbat. Okay, we have the next section is that Shabbat is considered equivalent to all the mitzvot. The truth is there's quite a few mitzvot which are compared to all of the mitzvot. And if you go to page 17, the last paragraph before section 12, it says, the sages declare, anyone who observes Shabbat properly, even if he worships foreign deities, is forgiven. By virtue of observing Shabbat properly, one's faith is reinforced. Intentional sins are treated as unintentional and forgiven. The sages all said anyone who observed Shabbat is distanced from sin. So it's a central mitzvah, and the sages really were encouraging us to be as careful about Shabbat as possible. And that's a motivation for us to be studying the laws of Shabbat. Now, somebody who converts, you can't know everything before you convert. Am I right, Israel? Am I right, Pinchas? Whoever went through the process, you learned a lot, and you went to the mikvah, and the Beit Din and the mikvah, and here you are afterwards studying more. Because you can't learn everything before you convert. You have to keep learning. And the most important topics to study, some people say you have to study this before you convert, are laws of Shabbat, the laws of Kashrut, and the laws of family purity. Most basic mitzvot of what it means to be a Jew. And of course prayers and brachot and daily the holidays and stuff like that. But Shabbat and Kashrut, out of all the mitzvot in the Torah, Shabbat is one of the central ones. If you don't know how to keep Shabbat, it's very hard for you to be a good Jew. So here we are, Baruch Hashem. We're going to skip the next section. It says that the temple was destroyed because they didn't keep Shabbat. It's actually psukim that Nehemiah, when he came with the exiles back to Israel, he made sure that they kept Shabbat. And Yirmiyahu, of course, in the first temple also spoke about how that they're not keeping Shabbat, so the temple has to be destroyed. Let's go to the positive side of things. Let's go to page 18, section 13. It's chapter 1, section 13. Redemption is dependent upon Shabbat observance. This he is quoting extensively from Yeshayahu 56. It's well known because it's the Haftarah on every fast day. We speak about somebody who is wanting to join the Jewish people. Maybe somebody who feels he's out of the Jewish people because he doesn't have a family. Let not the eunuch say, "Yea, I am a withered tree, for I have no children and no future." Somebody who's a foreigner and attached himself to the Lord, maybe it's a ger toshav. The Lord separates me from his people. I will not be part. For thus saith the Lord. You want to be part? You want to be part? You want to be a Jew? You want to merit the wonderful relationship with Hashem that the Jews have? You want to have salvation? I'm in the middle of page 19 now. For thus said the Lord. As for the eunuchs who keep my Shabbatot, who have chosen what I desire and hold fast to my covenant, I will give them in my house and within my walls a monument and a memorial better than sons or daughters. I will give them an everlasting name which shall not perish. And to the foreigners who attach themselves to the Lord, to serve him and to love the name of the Lord and to be his servants, all who keep from profaning Shabbat and hold fast to my covenant. You see here that a central part of becoming a Jew, of attaching yourself to the Jewish people, is keeping the Shabbat. I will bring them to my sacred mount and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices shall be welcome upon my altar. For my house shall be called a house of worship for all peoples. The word of the Lord God, who gathers the dispersed of Israel, will gather still more to those already gathered. So we have that. We see that the keeping of Shabbat is a central part of what it means to be a Jew. Those joining the Jewish people, even if you don't, you feel, I'm not really joining the Jewish people because I don't have children. I don't have Jewish children. No, you are part. As long as you're a Jew and you keep the Shabbat, God will provide you a memorial. I will give them a monument and a memorial better than sons and daughters, an everlasting name. You become a Jew, you are part of this bond of the Jewish people. Okay?
Where is this quote from a house that we call a house of prayer for all peoples?
Oh yeah, this is, we said it many times on Yom Kippur and on the days leading up to Yom Kippur in the Slichot. Maybe if I say it in Hebrew, you'll recognize it. Some people sing it. I will bring them to my holy mountain. V'simachti beveit tefilati. Olotehem, their burnt sacrifice. V'zivcheihem leratzon al mizbechi. Ki veiti, for my house. Beit tefillah. Yikareh lechol ha'amim. My house will be a house of prayer for all the nations. Everybody will come to the Beit HaMikdash to pray there. Everybody will recognize the God of the Jews as the one true God. And this is our ultimate end game. Somebody asked me the other day, can a non-Jew give a gift? For sure. Beiti, Beit Tfilah, my house, the Beit HaMikdash will be a house of prayer for all the nations. Okay, that's
It's from Chazal.
It's in Yeshayahu 56.
Ah.
This is this entire page that we're quoting now. Verse 19 is Yeshayahu 56, 1 to 8. Verse 1 through 8. That's what we quoted here. See, it's a prophecy of Isaiah. And Isaiah prophesied that, and we quote that many times in our prayers on Yom Kippur. Just before the Shema Koleinu section, for those who were paying attention to to the slichot and the Ashkenazi slichot, anyways, and we'll have the Shema Kolenu section. Yeah, sure.
Even Yom Kippur, even Yom Tov, if Yom Tov is on the Shabbat. The Ashkenazi Siddur, no Kabbalah Shabbat, the Tzad. I don't know why.
It's Kabbalah.
I don't know why either. I can give you a guess. Pinchas is asking, there is a custom in Ashkenazi communities that when Yom Tov falls out on Shabbat, we don't say the full Kabbalat Shabbat. This custom, it's a custom to say Kabbalat Shabbat at all. It's basically 7 chapters of Tehillim, and then the beautiful song of the Chadodi. That's what we call today Kabbalat Shabbat. It's an order of prayer which was instituted only a couple of hundred years ago. And the Psalms are old, but to say them on Friday night, it developed over the last maybe 400 years. In Judaism, that's very recent. It doesn't go back to the Talmud, which is the first thing. So reciting this series of Tehillim, what we call Kabbalat Shabbat, the custom became universal. Now both Sephardim and Ashkenazim, not absolutely universal, and the custom developed that when it's Yom Tov, we don't say them. So why is your question? Why don't we say them? It's still Shabbat, even though it's Yom Tov. So I have one explanation, which makes sense to me when Yom Tov is on Friday, and then comes Shabbat. So you're already in Yom Tov, you're in your Yom Tov clothes, you've been celebrating the Yom Tov, you're joyous, you're having your meat and wine, and then the next day is Shabbat. So the logic is, what is Kabbalat Shabbat for? It's to bring in the Shabbat. It's to sort of help you transition from weekdays to holy days. But I'm already in a holy day. If I'm already in a holy day, I don't need that transition. So the explanation makes sense to me. When you're moving from a Yom Tov to Shabbat, that you shouldn't say the full Kabbalat Shabbat. Some communities say only one Mizmor Shir or 2 Mizmor Shir Yom Shabbat and Hashem Malach. Some people say from Mizmor LeDavid, a little bit of the Chadodi, the first 2 and the last 2 of the Chadodi, and then Mizmor Shir Yom Shabbat. Whatever the customs are, there is a very strong custom to shorten the Kabbalat Shabbat. But when it comes out on the same day, I don't understand. When it's on the same day, why not? Welcoming the Shabbat. Maybe it's considered another thought is that maybe it's considered to be embarrassing or not as much respect for the Yom Tov. Because you're going to sing all these Mizmorim to enter in the Shabbat. What about entering in the Yom Tov? It's like you're ignoring the Yom Tov and you're making all these preparations for Shabbat, but not for Yom Tov. So maybe to avoid the disrespect to the Yom Tov, the custom is we don't say Kabbalat Shabbat, or at least not the full Kabbalat Shabbat. We just do a little portion of it. But the truth is, a lot of people don't like the shortened. They do the full thing. They do the full thing. Sephardi does the full thing.
There's a special outfit for Yom Tov.
Sure. When it's Yom Tov, we say special prayers, and we add in that it's also Shabbat. The 2 days.
The result, according to the customer, more short.
The truth is that the sages say that you should be very careful not to make the prayers too long on Shabbat, because people have to go home and enjoy the Shabbat. Ironically, because we have a Torah reading, which is 7 readings, and people have more time, they're not going to work. Many times the prayers are longer on Shabbat and Yom Tov, but we have to find the right balance. You have to find the right balance. The prayers are a beautiful part of the Shabbat and the Yom Tov celebrations. So we're going to talk more about that later. Okay, does that answer a little bit the question? Yeah, okay, next. There is a rabbi of South Africa, the chief rabbi of South Africa. Has anybody heard his name before? No.
Oh, no, it's a Malaysia. No, not Malaysia.
I think his name
I
is...
think he was. I just saw a news headline. He was like protesting against the president of South Africa because they're all Hamas.
Yeah, good for him. Good for him. His name is Warren Goldschmidt, if I'm not mistaken. Warren, Rabbi Warren Goldschmidt. A couple of years back, must be maybe 3-4 years back, he started a movement. You know, in South Africa, there's a lot of religious Jews and a lot of Jews who are traditional, but not so observant. And he, as a rabbi, felt he knows the importance of Shabbat. Everything we're learning, he learned. And he knows that Shabbat is so central. And he made a campaign. Public media, everything. Let's try and keep one Shabbat. Even if you're secular and you don't keep Shabbat every week, 1 week a year. Let's do one. And he made a banner, a campaign, keeping it together, to unite all the Jewish people. We should all keep one Shabbat. That was the slogan, keeping it together. So it's like keeping the Jewish people together, but keeping Shabbat. And it really worked. It got very popular in South Africa, and the next year it went worldwide. It's known as the Shabbat Project, if I'm not mistaken. And now in maybe hundreds of cities around the world, this one Shabbat a year, there's programs and there's community events and there's community meals. In Tel Aviv, there was a meal with over 1,000 people, a Shabbat meal for over 1,000 people in Tel Aviv, not just for religious. And the same slogan, the Shabbat should unite us. And even though it might be too hard for everybody, once a year, one Shabbat. It's an amazing project.
Which
It's very successful. I don't know which one it is, but yeah, sometimes I hear in the press, this is coming, Shabbat project, get ready and galvanize the community, make a Shabbat meal in your home for everybody. It's a beautiful, beautiful project. And you know what it's based on? The next line. He quotes a midrash from Chazal. It says, at the bottom, page 19, the second last paragraph. If the Jewish people keep 2 Shabbatot properly, they will immediately be redeemed. As it says, as for the eunuchs who keep my Shabbatot, I will bring them to my sacred mountain. So you see the verses in Isaiah, the verses in Yeshayahu, they seem to indicate that if you keep the Shabbat, we'll get to the ultimate end goal that we're going to have a Beit HaMikdash and everybody from around the world is going to come and worship in the Beit HaMikdash. So if you want to bring the redemption, keep Shabbat. So he's bringing the redemption. He's doing what he can. Now it's interesting, go ahead. Shmuel, read the bottom of 19 at first glance.
At first glance, this dictum raises a question. Why do the sages state that if the Jewish people observe 2 Shabbatot, they will immediately be redeemed? Don't these verses imply that redemption is also dependent on justice and righteousness? The answer seems to be that if the Jews keep 2 Shabbatot properly, they will also be just and righteous. Because keeping Shabbatot liberates one from his enslavement to money and wealth and refines his faith. This leads to the desire to pursue justice and righteousness throughout the week. This accords with another statement of the sages: the Jewish people will be redeemed only in the merit of Shabbat, as it is written, "You shall triumph by stillness, b'shuvah, and quiet, Yeshayahu, v'yikra Rabba." In truth, we can achieve redemption by practicing justice and righteousness, because by doing so we are released from the bonds anchoring us to the material world and its impulses. Thus we perfect the 6 days, the 6 weekdays, allowing us to observe Shabbat properly and to increase our faith and closeness to God, through which we will merit redemption.
So it's not one or the other. It's not just, you can keep Shabbat and continue to be a thief and a cheat and a liar and a vile human being. The assumption is that it goes together. Of course, and all this doesn't always progress at the same time. Unfortunately, we have very honest people who don't keep the Shabbat, and we have people who keep the Shabbat who are not very honest. But the goal is that the Shabbat will impact us in a positive way and for social justice and everything else. And that's what brings the redemption, ultimately, the fixing of society. Go ahead.
Why is it stillness b'shuva?
B'shuva v'nachat tivasheun, you shall be saved through shuva. Shuva is like...
Shiva?
Yeah, it's like rest. It's like rest, quiet, stillness. So Shabbat, shuva, same word, the idea of rest on Shabbat. And it's a midrash of Chazal that they try to bring out this idea and connect it to the pasuk. I don't know if that's the simple meaning of the verse, but this is the way that our sages understood it. And this is where we treat their words, the words of the sages, as very instructive. And their wisdom is central to our tradition. And so... of all the mitzvot, the Lubavitcher Rebbe chose a mitzvah to try to get everybody to keep. Anybody know what that is? Tefillin, right? He guys, the people, the soldiers, off getting everybody put on tefillin. It's much easier to put on tefillin for 10, 30 seconds, a minute or two, than to keep Shabbat. But whatever, here, it makes sense. Rabbi Goldstein made a good call to try to get people to keep Shabbat because it's so central to, and it can bring the redemption. And it could lead to the everybody being a better person. That's the goal. Let me ask you a question, though. We're going to have to break soon. Let me ask you a question. Why does the Midrash that we just quoted, why does it say, if all of Israel keeps 2 Shabbatot, they will be redeemed? Why not 1? 1 should be good enough. If all of Israel kept 1 Shabbat. Rabbi Goldstein made the Shabbat project, it's 1 Shabbat. Why if Israel keep 2 Shabbatot?
In 1 year.
I don't know. It sounds like I would assume it means in sequence. 1 and then the next one. If all the Jews keep 2 Shabbatot properly, they will immediately be redeemed. Why 2?
Outside Israel.
Like there's 2 Yom Tovs outside of it. Good. Okay. No, but what do you think?
We have a discount.
Right. 2 Shabbatot. It goes back to what we were saying earlier, perhaps, that the Shabbat is a sequence. It's connected to the 7 days, right? There's the Shabbat at the beginning of the week. There's Shabbat at the end of the week. There's, it's not really a complete cycle until you've had the Shabbat, perhaps, at the beginning and at the end. 2 Shabbatot, on the simple reason is 2 means you're serious about it, right? 1 is a one-off. Okay, one. It's not really commitment, but if you do 2, then it already shows you're serious about it, right? Maybe I'm just trying to think, but that's what the Chazal say: 2 Shabbatot, then they're immediately redeemed. There's I'll send you a link. I grew up with a song by Menachem ben David. He's a Jewish pop singer, Hasidic pop singer, and he sang this song about a guy doing tshuva. He comes to the Western Wall on Friday night, and it's such a beautiful scene. And somebody stops him and invites him into his home, and he gets so blown away by the beauty of Shabbat, and he becomes religious. And you know what the chorus of the song is? Just 1 Shabbos and we'll all be free. Just 1 Shabbos, come and join with me. So this concept of just 1 Shabbos, if everybody keeps 1 Shabbos, we'll be redeemed. This is a very powerful one in our consciousness, that we want everybody to keep Shabbat. It's very common that perhaps Shabbos is the is the strongest, most sweetest part of observant Judaism that we have. So if you have a friend at work who's not observant, you want to come to my house for a Shabbat meal? Many times the first thing that we'll do to them is not say, did you put on film today? Although that's fine too. I'm not the one to judge. But you invite somebody over for a Shabbat meal, they can experience a little bit of the sweetness of Judaism, and it's just so filled with meaning and beauty that ultimately could have an impact for everybody to do teshuvah, to get closer to their heritage and to closer to Hashem. So B'ezrat Hashem, this is the idea of just one Shabbos. You know that there's a system, by the way, at the Kotel. Israel knows it very well for many months. If you go to the Kotel Friday night and you pray, after the prayers, there's like a guy at the back. For many years, there's a few guys, but one guy is still doing it, Rabbi Jeff Seidel. He sets people up for a meal. Yeah, you go there, and he's got his team of volunteers, which say, okay, you guys go to the Cohens, and you're going to go to the Schwartzes, and he's got his bank of families that are waiting, expecting guests from the Kotel that they've never met before. That's just somebody maybe who's never had a Shabbat meal, and so basically he picks them up from the Kotel, and he arranges a Shabbat meal for them. It's a beautiful thing. Every week, this happens every week. Tens and tens of, some families have more than one or two guests. Some families have 10 guests themselves. Yeah, there's a family, Rabbi Machlis, his wife recently passed away, but he is such a tzaddik. She was such a tzaddik. They have like 40 or 50 every week at their Shabbat table. And everybody goes around, everybody has to say who they are and where they're coming from and say something. Beautiful atmosphere. It's just so wonderful because we know that Shabbat is so beautiful. We want to share it with everybody in the world. Just one Shabbos and we'll all be free. So this goes together with what we're learning about Shabbat, bringing redemption, based on the Psukim in Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu speak about the people joining us and keeping Shabbat, and ultimately they're praying with us on the Temple Mount. And where the temple's rebuilt. So we see that the gathering ends with the gathering of the dispersed. So Shabbat is very central to our activities. B'ezrat Hashem. And the last line on page 20 of the last line of 13 is the sages further state by virtue of keeping Shabbat we merit living in Eretz Yisrael. We want to beat our enemies who want to conquer us. What should we do? Of course, we should fight in the trenches and in the planes and tanks, but also we should keep Shabbat. If your children accept Shabbat, they will enter the land. If not, they will not enter. This is a midrash from Chazal. Entering the land is the beginning of redemption. So we need to keep Shabbat in order to dig in the land of Israel, not let anybody push us away. It's part of the war effort. Here we are, we're not fighting, we're not wearing green. Everybody has a different role, but our role is to keep Shabbat. If we're not fighting, make sure that also helps us. I have a son who's not in the army. I have a son in the army now who's training and getting ready, and I hope he's successful and safe. And I have another son, actually two other sons who are not in the army right now. And my wife just told me, she spoke with my daughter-in-law, she was saying that, she was telling him, you've got to eat well and you've got to sleep well and be strong because you got to go pray and learn. That's what he's doing. He's learning and praying. And that's also, that you're part of the war effort. And this is the consciousness of many, many religious Jews who, for whatever reason, their rabbis told them not to go to the army. They should be having the consciousness that they're part of the war effort, and the mitzvahs that they do, and the Torah that they learn, and the Shabbat that they keep. And we're included in that. Here we are not fighting. We have to, in the merit of Shabbat, of keeping Shabbat, we merit to live in the land of Israel. B'ezrat Hashem. We should very soon see clear victory. And a lot of the soldiers asked to get, they need equipment. So the guns they have from the army, and they have the boots and the uniforms. It took a while for all the soldiers to get all the equipment they need. But there was one equipment which a lot of soldiers were asking for, and the army was not ready for. Do you know what it is?
Tefillin. And
Tzitzit. And so a lot of the Haredi yeshivas, the guys are sitting around tying the tzitzit. They bought thousands and thousands of green tzitziot, green garments, and they're tying on the tzitzit to give them to the soldiers. Soldiers want the protection. They feel that it's like a bulletproof vest, the tzitzit. I hope they wear both if they have. But the tzitzit, the merit of doing mitzvot, helps you. And maybe people will connect to their heritage a little more through this horrifying experience of fighting for our land.
The bulletproof vest in Hebrew is called
Shachpatz.
an ephod.
Ephod, you're right.
For like the breastplate of the
like
priest.
The breastplate of the priest. That's very similar, yeah. Okay, we'll stop here for today. B'ezras Hashem. Soon we're going to meet downstairs in the new building where we usually meet for our gathering of at 11 o'clock, the gathering of the English department.